Wausau City Hall, Maple Room, 400 Grand Street, Wausau, Wisconsin. I did not have anybody sign up for public comment, so we'll go ahead and start with the agenda. Number 3, educational presentations and committee discussions. We have today with us City and County of La Crosse efforts to address homelessness, Pathways Home, Jason and Jim. And if you guys could introduce yourselves and let us know, your background and that kind of thing, we can go ahead and get started.
Alrighty. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to be here. And my name is Jason Witt, so I am Director of the Human Services Department in La Crosse County. And just a little background in the role in the homelessness effort there. It was in 2022, late 2022, where the mayor of the city of La Crosse and the La Crosse County administrator decided to form a partnership to address homelessness. So I was tasked with coordinating things on the county end in terms of organizing and creating a homeless plan, along with my counterpart at the city, who was Brian Sampson, and Brian is on the call remotely. And Brian, do you want to introduce yourself and your role?
Yeah, so my name is Brian Sampson. Like Jason said, I work for the city of La Crosse here, and I am the homeless services coordinator. So that's my official role and title with the city of La Crosse.
And after we created a plan and launched that plan to implement the plan, homelessness and homelessness response was new to the county and was new to the Human Services Department. So we hired a project manager who is now administering and delivering the homeless plan, and that is Jim Dree. So,
hello everyone. I've been with Pathways Home since July. Coming from different background, mostly business, but also nonprofit world on there. And really doing project management activities. My title is Homelessness Response System Manager.
And I would just say on behalf of all of us, we're really encouraged and excited to be here today and having this discussion with you. And you really caught us on a pretty historic day for us, we'll say, because January 8th is the exact day 1 year ago that at this time probably we were in front of the City Council of La Crosse and the La Crosse County Board launching Pathways Home. So we unveiled to the community the Pathways Home Plan at that meeting and had a really robust discussion after the meeting with both the City Council and the County Board supervisor. So that was January 8th. So folks, first just want to applaud you for taking this work on. And kind of looking around the landscape of Wisconsin and city-county relationships, at least it seemed to us, outside of the larger jurisdictions, outside of Milwaukee, outside of Dane County, there's been a little bit of a reluctance of local government to step into this space and really take a leadership role, and there's some good reasons for that. I think we were one of the first, perhaps, to have a comprehensive plan and really trying to do that. And now I know there are others. The work that you're doing here, Eau Claire County with their city was recently doing some work in this space. So with that, that's awesome because now we have an opportunity to collaborate with other jurisdictions and counties and to learn from you all. So I think with that, maybe cut to the chase a little bit and talk about the biggest challenge we face in doing this work because again, this was very new to us. And what surprised us, maybe that the biggest challenge in coming together and doing this work was not what to do about homelessness. I mean, you can go out and there's research and you can find what could be the best solution for your community. We found that, it was kind of surprising too, resources are not going to be the biggest challenge. I'll guarantee you, like in our community, your community, there is enough resources in the community to make sure everybody has a place to go at night and everybody is off the street. But really, I think that the biggest challenge that we face is that if this work is to be done effectively, it has to be done different than what it has in the past. And it represents change, and change is a very difficult thing for any organization or for any community to do. So this was really a change in roles for the city and county in terms of how we showed up to the community on this issue. And we haven't always had the best working relationship between city and county. I think everybody in our jurisdiction would tell you that. But it's going to be a change in terms of how we work together. It was a change in terms of helping agencies across the county too, and how work in the space and share it and work at it together. It was a change from what we had been for a long time, was very reactionary and crisis orientated, and a lot of trying to find the quick fix in the next killer program that's going to solve this, and really approaching this issue more strategically. And there is one thread, at least that we found as we looked across the country in jurisdictions that had been successful, that to be successful on this issue, you need as many resources as you can muster in the community, from nonprofit, from philanthropy, to supporting laws and policies, all rowing in the same direction, all towards the same philosophies, goals, and purpose. That, though, is super difficult to achieve. There are so many diverse viewpoints on homelessness, as you know, and we'll share some of those diverse viewpoints from our community. There's so many self-interests in the city as well, so many comfortable practices, and I think that's the ever-present desire and pull for the quick fix. If there's some criticism or pushback we've found in our planet is, gosh, I thought you guys said you were going to do something about this and took this over. That was January. We're 3 months into this. We still have homeless people. So again, really the pressure to do something fast is in overcoming that's a great challenge as well. So we're going to share today a little bit our journey in creating the plan for our community that we call Pathways Home, and probably look at providing, we'll make sure we're done at 4, if that's okay with our presentation. I'll take about 45 minutes, Jim about 15, and then we'd love the opportunity for questions as well. So we thought maybe it would be good to start making sure I'm doing this right.
Okay, try again.
Okay. Oh,
It's going on my screen.
okay.
There, now.
Okay. So just with some relevant information about La Crosse County. So there is La Crosse County. We made the trip from today. Our population of the county is about 121,000. The city of La Crosse is about 51,000. The main City of La Crosse is the main urban center in La Crosse County. So that's where really all of our unsheltered population, all of our homeless reside within that urban center. You know, the dynamics that creates with other jurisdictions, smaller cities or jurisdictions around. Have some large nonprofits. This is just a few of really the larger ones that are in the space of homelessness. We have Cooley Tap that holds the contract with the Balance of State for the coordinated entry list and does supportive housing and does a lot of other programming in La Crosse County. We have the Salvation Army, and Salvation Army operates what is really our only 24/7 shelter facility. 65 beds in La Crosse County for a shelter. And we have Catholic Charities that during the wintertime has an overnight shelter, but also has other housing programs. But those are the largest nonprofits in this space. And in terms of county services, just know, because it's a little unique, I think, for Marathon County, Human Services Department has both behavioral health and social services is one department. I know it's just organized a little bit differently here in terms of behavioral health and social services. So that's just a little bit of information about La Crosse County. Share a little bit of history in terms of how our community addressed or served homeless individuals. Let's say up until 2015, I guess we just siloed services. Again, we've got great nonprofits. That's just 3. We've got many that serve homeless individuals, and Human Services is part of that in a sense, because through our behavioral health services and other services, we certainly have consumers that we serve who are unhoused or are homeless. So a lot of great helping agencies serving individuals that are homeless. But no coordination in terms of one homeless response plan, no systematic approach to that. With homelessness rising and unsheltered rising, we had a period of time where the community really came together to have some coordination around the issue of homelessness, and that began in 2016. We had a health system that sponsored a national consultant to come into our area and bring nonprofits together to develop a plan and to work together. That was a community-led collaboration. And with that, I'll say our role as government, we are a stakeholder at the table. We did not convene or lead that collaboration, but in the space of serving homeless, we were at the table for that because we wanted to make sure our services that could help were connected. Also, both from the community and from local government, there were contributions to that coalition as well. La Crosse County contributed $500,000 for the prevention initiative under this collaborative during that time. So again, there was a lot of money invested through this. I kind of through this time around 2022, unfortunately that collaboration wasn't able to be sustained. We had the pandemic come and had a large rise in our unsheltered population. And then we kind of entered a time I really call where we had a bunch of like short-term emergency solutions. And really this time we kind of got into, I really call it a doom cycle, we would call that, where we had a lot of short-term emergency interventions. They were mostly centered around mass housing. If we could just find a place where everybody could go. So it was either mass housing or encampments. We had a sanctioned encampment for a period of time, and then we had a hotel that was rented that folks could go over the winter that really was an indoor encampment, for lack of better words for it. Now that was not connected to any long-term strategy or plan. Those ended when the money ran out for those, and we often found ourselves in a worse situation with more homeless than we started with after those interventions. So with that, and kind of at the precipice of us coming together, this is what we faced in terms of a homeless population in La Crosse County. About 220 individuals that were homeless. You see kind of at the top for everybody, an individual to give you the size and scope. 114 of those individuals that were unsheltered, so without a place to go. So you just see that, we call that a crisis. When you have that many homeless individuals, and over half of your homeless individuals in a place they could go at night or off the street, many of them in encampments. And that's where really we were at. And again, if you recall that we had any approach, there really wasn't an coordinated approach. We had great helping agencies, whether they're providing outreach, shelter, prevention in this space, doing their best to serve folks. But again, I think that the main point here is not connected under an overall strategy and plan. And we'd say, at this time when we had this happening and we had large encampments, approaching 200 individuals in encampment, faced a period of time where had a lot of folks fed up in the city and in the county, for better words. We began to get funders fed up. And I would say that would be from the county as well, that, gosh, we've invested a lot of dollars and resources to make things better. Why are things getting worse? Why are we not getting results from this? The public was certainly fed up, and there was a lot of heated public hearings with the public really around the public safety issues that were emerging around the encampments and where unsheltered individuals gathered. And there was really an outcry from policymakers, from the community. What else can we do? Can we do something different? And we had policymakers on the city council and county board very passionate about this issue and wanting to do something. I think also there was this growing recognition of not only the costs that were devoted to hopefully making something better, but there were these mounting costs of doing nothing, or doing nothing different. And those costs included the human suffering. A great amount of human suffering in the encampments too. We had, I think, a murder in the encampments. We had child trafficking. Just not a good place. There's human suffering, and no stranger to how cold it is outside here and the impacts and what that has on human life. So getting the human suffering, the continued cost of just that. Continuing public safety issues. There was criminal activity with folks that were in the encampments and surrounding that, and that impacted the surrounding communities, and that spilled over. And there was growing costs of public safety issues. Community and that with community reputation in terms of people wanting to come and do business, visit City of La Crosse. We have such a large visible issue that the community seems helpless to do anything about. So toll on community reputation. But also financial costs. There are pretty good statistics out there in terms of how much it really costs the community for each individual that was unhoused. And first looked at this and said, gosh, per individual, it's about $37,000 or so a year for an unhoused individual to a community doing nothing, and that seemed high at first. But as we got into this more, what we found is those that are in shelter, how often use emergency rooms at hospitals. And there's a lot of good data showing how much that goes down if someone is just sheltered. So there were extraordinary costs our health systems are facing for having people in our community that were unsheltered. A lot of costs in jail and in law enforcement around the encampments. A lot of costs in environmental cleanup. It took a lot of city time and resources to go in on a regular basis. It was almost like another neighborhood, run the trucks through and clean up. A lot of costs in that. So really take a look at that and calculate it that we were going to spend $20 million at this rate over the next 5 years just by doing nothing different with this staying the same. So in 2023, with this mounting pressure and really urge to act, the mayor and county administrator decided that the city and county would in fact do something very different and form a partnership in addressing homelessness. So what we were going to go through is a bit about what is the city and county's role in this effort. It took a long time. We went through a very comprehensive planning process to develop the plan we did. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll go into some detail on the Pathways Home 5-year plan. And no going into some heavy detail there. Try to go quickly just to see if it piques interest for the discussion purposes afterwards. If you see something you want to ask more questions about. And we'll talk a little bit about the status. So again, just we completed 1 year with Pathways Home and where we're at. And with that, I'll pause because we do have copies here of the Pathways Home plan. So we certainly pass this around. There's the plan and then kind of a one-pager that describes the approach of Pathways. I believe there is enough plans for everyone. There may not be enough of the handouts. So first for the city and county's role, where we really see our role is providing backbone support. So all of the homeless supports in our community can function not individually, but set up as a whole in an interlocking system and being able to provide backbone support for that. So what does that mean? That means city and county infrastructure is used to support, and by infrastructure, I mean staff. Staff, like I was involved in this project. We'll talk about how our IT department was involved, how our county marketing director was involved. So use some of the infrastructure that we have to do things like planning. So instead of just being stakeholders at the table in community planner, we would convene planning and use county property for this. We seek support from county staff, but we convene. We would gather input and create a plan. So we would provide the support for that plan. Also, performance monitoring, that the community can really see across the community what's working and what's not. We'll see later, the voices of our funders were really high on that. Well, what are we getting for our dollars, where it's going, what's working? We can use county infrastructure to have some public-facing things that can help that. The big one is coordination of activities, and we'll see in the plan where we use county infrastructure staff at key points to act as facilitators for processes to bring those together. And to make sure, at the end of the day, how our all of our resources in the community can be better maximized. And also, again, just ensuring that transparency and accountability. So it means those things, but it's important too what things it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that the county is taking over or assuming responsibility for homeless response and everything that goes along with it. For example, mainline functions you call that. Salvation Army does a shelter in our community. We're not going to get in the business of shelter. A nonprofit in the space doing that. We would never have the resources to take on mainline functions within tax levy caps and everything else. So it's not taking over what the nonprofit community is doing in those functions. And it's certainly not assuming all funding responsibility. Where we can and where we can target funds, we certainly do that. You'll see a lot of interesting investments that have gone into this. A lot of the coordinating resources and leveraging infrastructure that already exists, recognizing that there's not just room and funding structures to add a whole new function. Although there is, we'll talk about, when we say there's enough resources within a community, there is across nonprofits, across government, across our great philanthropic community, and it's gathering all of those resources. It's not government taking the lead in funding this. We just couldn't do it. So those are some things that what it means and what it doesn't in terms of that backbone support. So in summary for that, again, it's providing coordination, support, and oversight, serving as a system backbone. That will no longer be operating in silos, but as for the first time, a homeless response system. That included creating the 5-year plan that you'll see and is being passed around. It's leveraging some of that existing infrastructure. It is the transparency and accountability. And for the funding prioritization, it helps that we have useful information, seeing what's working and what's not, again, our philanthropic organizations can choose to guide funding, and we certainly, any funding that now we provide to nonprofits in this space, it used to be, gosh, you're doing good work in this space, yeah, I mean, to continue the funding. Now it's a lot of hard questions. Is what you're doing working, and most of all, is it aligned with this plan? So it's making sure resources are a lot more aligned. Because I mean, at the end of the day, this is all about for this to happen, the whole community is what we want to do, and we want to do something different. So maybe interested in, that's our public-facing role that we have, city and county. And we'll talk a little bit about that next in terms of how that's lockstep. We're co-equal partners in this now. So what is that relationship, though, between the city and county? The first is we are co-equal partners. That means we were the final decision makers, city and county, in terms of what you see in this plan. There's nothing in here that the county said is in this and the city disagreed with. No, it's one plan, and we're decision makers in terms of what's in this, and we share the overall responsibility. And when we show up to the community in this space, we're showing up with one voice, city and county in this space. Now within this working relationship, and I hesitate to show this because it's not cut and dry, because we are very flexible in terms of how we share our resources to work. But generally, we said, okay, with our infrastructure and what can we support, what can we take on that is already kind of in our wheelhouse, that is comfortable for us. So for the city, that is system coordination for efficient outreach and access to housing and shelter connections. So it's a lot of Brian's role in making sure community resources is used well in a systemic processes, so folks can get to the shelter and housing that's available, and it's working as one system. So the coordination around that area, and having, making sure we can do as we can as we community to have enough shelter and housing space, coordination on the city's end. Also, the maximization of that capacity. On the county's end, one is project management of the plan as a whole. So that's Jim's role. And the reason why that lies with the county, we'll say first, this plan is the city of La Crosse and La Crosse County. We realize that the benefit and the necessity to have a more of a county coordinated plan. We started here because it took a long time just to work out this relationship between the city and county that hadn't worked in the past. We need that real tight relationship. We will be expanding to more county-wide in how that works. And with the project teams in a position, city and the county, to be able to do that. So project management of the plan as a whole, and a little bit different than the shelter and housing connections, system coordination around the service connections, like case management and like wraparound supports. And kind of why is this? Because really the city side, it kind of deals more with property development within the city. They manage the community development block grant. Those types of things line the city's kind of their wheelhouse, so they're kind of taking that end of it. On the county side, like through Human Services, we do case management for some programs. We have some of the wraparound services. So it's just not our services that are operating the system, but we know that space, so we're coordinating services within that space a little bit more. So that's the nature of the partnership between city and county. So talk a little bit about what we explained, some of the things to know about this approach, because talked about before, we were very kind of reluctant to step into this space, as others are, because we want to make sure if we did, because we don't have to, right? It's not a mandated service to do. We want to do it, make sure it's done right. We're interested in anything that's going to perpetuate our doom cycle that we did before. And if we were going to step in and do it, wanted to do it in certain ways. First, knowing that we're not going for the quick win. We're not going for the magic program. We're going to build a new system, because that's what's going to be effective long-term in homelessness. So we're building a new system. It takes time. It is a 5-year plan. That's why 3 months into the plan, a year in the plan, we still haven't sheltered in the city of La Crosse. It's a 5-year plan. Just to know too, reaching functional zero, which we'll talk about is a goal of the plan, is enormously challenging, bringing all of the services together and building this system. And you can see this across the state. See that in Green Bay, their numbers rising there and the concern around that. You can see kind of generally cities lobbying Congress for more help. There was just something in the news, the city of Eau Claire City Council passed a resolution imploring the state to provide more help. People are struggling with this. It's not a finger-pointing exercise that someone dropped the ball on this or someone not doing something right. There's not a great roadmap for this. We need to make this up really as we go along in terms of what we fit in the community. So it's challenging. It's going to take some time, but we're dedicated to doing it and doing it right. And again, acting strategically is necessary. If you're not going to make the problem worse. You can do the research across the country, and you'll find plenty of examples where jurisdictions have poured money into housing initiatives. The problem has gotten worse. And again, we're in this for the long-term solution, and find out why in those jurisdictions did the problem get worse and not better, and we're not repeating those same mistakes. So making sure solutions are sustainable. Again, we can pour big money into a short-term housing project. Are we going to be able to find the budget or things to sustain that for a long term? So what can we be sustain those long-term goals? And at the end of the day, too, knowing we can do this, we do have the resources. It's tough work to collaborate and do something different, but we can do it. So next, talk about, so how did we pull together a planning process to develop pathways home? And I wanted to think here, it's kind of an example, and you find these examples throughout how different expertise throughout city and county was used. In La Crosse County, in our Human Services Department, they do a lot of training and organizational development and leadership, and really had a lot of consultation. How do you do strategic planning like this? And find a lot of useful information from that. Know that project phases. So June through December of 2023 is when we did our planning process. It's a 6-month planning process. Just that's those 6 months were condensed because there's a lot packed into to that. We had to design the design for the planning process, and then we had to run through the planning process, and then finalize in writing and in deliverables and in timelines a 5-year plan. So 6 months was a very compressed time, but that's when that was done. The next phase, which we're in now and will be to 2028, is implementation. And we'll see we have years built up with different goals. Again, 2024 was just concentrated to get hires. Yeah, we got to get people in place. We got to start building the systems differently. So it's around building the system. Next year, as we talked about, is the year that we can end this crisis by the end of the year. And then finish the work for sustainability, where after that, we can maintain this because this will have our role set, we'll have the system, we'll always be learning, but then sustaining the gains. The planning scope, we know there's a lot of resources and things to bring together to effectively address homelessness. So when we talk about elements, we've looked at what was happening across all of these elements: prevention, crisis response, and outflow. So prevention, all of those things that hopefully prevent folks from losing their home in the first place. Crisis response, if that happens and someone's unhoused, how do you get someone housing quickly? Then outflow, what is the permanent housing solution? So looked at what are the resources in our community, what are the process across that entire spectrum, and some of the domains. That means mainline response. So that is the outreach, that is the shelter, that is the permanent housing, everything that you think about homeless response. But then to have individuals be successful, there's a lot of wraparound supports and services that are involved. So everything from behavioral health, economic stability, all of those things are very important to tie together in a system. Also, doesn't operate independent as policies. So looking at HUD policies, there's some barriers in HUD policies in terms of how that has worked, but how does that work in terms of accessing housing? Law enforcement policies, arrest policies, health code policies, all of these things, and again, how this is all working together. When you look at the scope there, it became very apparent. It's much more complex than just throwing up a big shelter or adding more housing. It's a whole system-wide approach that's necessary. So for the back of better words, our process followed a circle, arrow, circle approach. And we started with that, really looking at how things were operating currently. So we call that the current state. So we did very intense system mapping, interviewing our service providers, service leaders around, and just observing what was happening. A very important phase, because we found during that process we had a lot of underutilized services and resources in our community. Talk about one, public housing. We found that there was a large number of vacancies in our public housing that were being filled by folks from out of state. Even though we have within our public housing a local preference, we have a homeless preference. So at the same time, we've got 200 folks on the street in our community. We have public housing because of lack of applications and lack of supports we'll talk about going elsewhere. So that's a housing resource that's underutilized in our community. Also related to public housing, we found as well, there can be some bureaucratic things to get in there and have that stick. So there was an agency in our community that was really good at placing folks in public housing, but found within 3 months there was an extraordinarily high eviction rate from public housing. Because once folks got in there, wasn't the supports or wraparound necessary, or wasn't maybe looked at up front if this was a person that could be successful in that going in there. So again, that was not being utilized. Programs. We have federal programs in our community. One of them is called tenant-based rental assistance. And found out we were returning tens of thousands of dollars each year, money that could pay for fair market rent for individuals, but wasn't being connected to individuals. And also there weren't spaces. Landlords won't rent to individuals under a cheaper voucher. And there are so many other options of folks to rent for there, but not being used. Also, within human services, we have behavioral health services. A lot of those that we get state and federal reimbursement for A lot of our homeless population that could have benefited from those services or provide the type of case management that could help folks make sure they're not evicted from public housing because they have the supports not being connected are utilized. So again, a lot of resources in the community could help not being utilized. And how do you go ask for more funding from your community or elsewhere? You're not really doing a good job using what's even there. So that mapping was very important. I'll say also we identified barriers. While in our community, you go across agencies, you've got a lot of agencies that have case managers, a lot of agencies that do different aspects of housing navigation. But we found well, there could be one person and there's a couple agencies working on an application for the same individual because it's not coordinated. There was some case conferencing happening in our community. It was basically centered around the coordinated entry list, but important stakeholders that could have been at that table to have those conversations couldn't attend because of the rules that were around that list. There was great information that should have been part of that list that it just doesn't provide the flexibility there. Also, HUD rules have a lot of barriers to them. With the HUD rules, sometimes housing has to be offered to the folks that are on top of the list. Even though people could see from a mile away, this is not going to be a fit. It's not going to be successful, but we can't help the person that we've got a match for now because we got to go in this order of the list. That's just Fed HUD rules. So those were some barriers. And we definitely also identified gaps. We had a gap in shelter beds. We had a gap in case management. And we know to put together a system, we needed to fill some of those gaps. So very important, took a long time, pretty intense, pretty staff intense to be involved in doing this. But really researched that current state. Then we put that aside. Forgot about it. So let's look at the future state. Let's look at if we were going to design this system from scratch, what would we do? What is our vision for what we want homeless response to be in our community? That was a lot of researching. What's working or not working across the country. That was working at things like community solutions that have the Build for Zero approach. And emphasize, you've got to be really organized. You've got to have your logistics down. You're going to be effective there, and other approaches. And it was doing the visioning. Then, really, which is the plan, how do we get from where we're at to the future? And how do we lay that out in a 5-year plan? So 3 really became that plan. So, with that, again, putting together this plan, city and county final decision makers in terms of what went into that plan. However, the city and county didn't want to be the authors of that plan. We didn't have the expertise to put this plan together by ourselves. We wanted to leverage the experts that were doing this work on the front line, the agencies in our community that have been doing this work, and making sure their expertise and voices were heard. Wanted to make sure our public's voices were heard in that. Our business community's voices were heard in this plan. So had a stakeholder engagement plan where we could bring that expertise and those voices into this plan. The coordinating team for putting together what's the process, seeing this through. Again, talked about staff intensive. This was the coordinating team that involves city and county folks. You can see their titles there that were involved in doing that. They were part of that coordinating team, working very closely with a lived experience, right? And their own team. Individuals that had been homeless, had found their way through that, had a lot of great information in terms of what worked for them, what would they like to see in the future. So, coordinating team, a lived experience team, and engaged many stakeholder groups. Not all of these were groups that met regularly. These groups kind of represent, these are categories of stakeholders we want to make sure we hear from. So at least once, we want to engage. So for example, our faith community. We held a faith forum for specifically talking about homelessness in the faith community, and they'd like to see in a vision how the faith community can partner to be involved. We went to our Rotary meetings, our downtown Rotary, heard from businesses, and you can see all of the different agencies that we at least went to once in this cycle to have a conversation and hear from. Partly from some of those groups, but really from individuals, organizations that have resources in this space, including landlords. We then formed what were core system work teams. From those experts, from those that were delivering services. And that could be, we had faith people on that group because their churches provided homeless types of services, even if it was a clothes closet or meals or something like that, on these core system work teams that met 3 times in 3 pretty intense sessions. One to really kind of look at to make sure we got the current state right, future state, make sure we got that right, and the planning process with that. Elected officials, not part of these design teams, not part of the design, but this plan kind of brought back to them in a policy-making role for one, setting up that this is important, go do this, and then bringing it back in terms of final product, and when there is funding decisions to be made, whether it's aligned with this. That was our core system work teams. So work through that process, and then our plan, that coordinating team's charge was get a draft of the homeless response plan on the desk of the mayor and county administrator by December 31st. And it may have been 11:59. We did it. We got it on that. All right. Yeah, and just thought maybe be interested in just hearing some of the voices from our community that we brought into this plan. I'll go through this quickly. Just to know our lived experienced folks can see what they said and what they contribute up there. But there was a lot of distrust of the system, really wanting to be part of the solution. They really brought in the need in our plan, making sure at every level peer supports were offered. You know, and that was so important to them. Community, and this is some of that fed up public, right? Going to City Hall saying, is anybody doing about this? Well, no, what's the county doing? The county isn't doing their fair share. Let's go over there and see what they're doing. We're not doing anything. We're waiting to see if the city. So no one's at the rudder in this thing. So we heard that a lot from the community. Fed up with the issues from the encampments. We heard this a lot from the community. You know, folks in the homeless area are there from a lot of circumstances beyond their control. Housing is a right. We heard from folks, no, you gotta earn housing. They're making bad decisions that put in this place. So, now you can get consensus. You know, there's a lot of different viewpoints as we went out to the community, but overall, pretty glad the city and county were coming together and doing something different, and that it does take a whole community. See some of our policymakers, again, wanted to see the data, wanted to see what's working, didn't have data. So that was them. Wanted more accountability, wanted a long-term plan. Oh, you see the dichotomy here too. I think some of it was on our county side say, no, we want the long-term plan. Some folks, no, we got to do something now. So again, it's a lot of divergent opinions. These are some themes from our work teams. And again, there's views, whether certain supports enable behaviors or not, whether there's just folks flooding in from other communities. And my God, if we put together services, people will flood in even more from other views. So I had all of these divergent views. So just to note, these were just some of the folks that and agencies that were part of those work teams. This is the future that they designed, that came out of this. And this is in the plan. You can read that we wanted to be something very, very different. And this is what we wanted to do. Just to kind of level set, you know, out of this, 6 months seems like a long time. Boy, I think we just scratched the surface of the overall system. And we couldn't get to some of these things we wanted to. A lot more in the space of youth homelessness and the couch surfing that happens with our high schoolers. You know, we didn't do a deep dive. You won't see that in our plan kind of stacked in the beginning of it. We're really kind of working on those folks, those individuals that are on the street now and how that system works. So we didn't get to everything we wanted to, but we put it in a plan for a later space. And attaining consensus, you're not. Not going to get consensus. Not everybody's going to be on board all the approaches and philosophies. That's why at the end of the day, you got to try to balance interests the best you can, see what works, and go with it. But again, is it at the end of the day, is the majority voices reflected in this, and is it considered what the community wants to do around the issue? Okay, talk a bit then about the plan itself. Again, new and different. It's the first time we're going to have a overall system, and that's at the heart of it, that we do have an integrated system. And it was our strategic and marketing analyst at the county that really took all of our work and things and put it in the, you see there. So we have the plan. You'll see in the plan, and I won't go over all these, but to read, there's great 8 action strategies we talk about that we've got to do work along all of these things, and they got to be integral parts of the plan. And then you'll find a lot of things in that plan that are great places. We had to organize that. What are we going to do first? What are we going to prioritize? How do we put that in a timeline? So you'll see that. Concrete goals. 0 individuals living on the street in the city. Going to end that crisis. And then build a system that can build and maintain homelessness functional 0. Key elements, again, coordination by local government, that we have resource and policy alignment, and that we have an indoor service orientation. Our conclusion from the research that a community really needs to make a choice. Do you want to continue serving folks on the street? Providing blankets on the street, providing needle pickup on the street, providing everything around the street is a lot of resources. Do you continue wanting to do that, or do you want to serve folks indoors? Doing both doesn't work that well because you do have some individuals who live outdoors, some migrating from other communities that, not for assistance, but be able to do behaviors you may not want in your community and do that unbothered. The plan does depend on enforcing the laws on the books around camping. When, and only when, that can be done humanely, because there is an option that can be offered to everyone, hopefully for housing. Hopefully you can move folks straight to housing, but if not, for a shelter when necessary. And putting safeguards in place, and we heard this clearly. Homelessness is a regional problem. It's a statewide problem. It's a federal problem. We don't have the resources to solve that. We have the resources to solve our community's problem. We don't want to have our local resources. We want to preserve those for local residents. So we want safeguards set up so that can happen. So, I'm going to go over quickly these lines of effort because they're important parts of the plan. We have our current state here. We've learned from our past efforts, successes and failures. There was some good things. I just mentioned how the community led the effort. Pull some things together, a lot of good things that we learned from there. We're heading towards the future state. We're going to backbone this. Let's see if I can pop up here. I have lost the connection with that.
Try again.
Okay, backbone by city and county. First, build the system. This is kind of the technical, logistical part of this. Resources flowing in the same direction. That means changing from this, going to that. We're integrated and we're coordinated. A little bit of what that looks like too. We know there's no quick fixes. If you're going to have an indoor service orientation, you need the housing, the wraparound supports for everyone. That is coordinated. That means that you have effective outreach that can move folks to shelter or housing very quickly. And you have the case management supports to make sure people can retain their housing. Making that exists in many agencies, not just one across the community, working in tandem, making sure gaps are filled, and working effectively. Creating the capacity. We knew we have some capacity that we have to fill. Igniting caring connections. So we'll say the first part is about the logistics. We got to get the logistics right. We also have to get the people part right. When you see anything you do in this space is so important in terms of if people are going to change too, are you giving them the purpose to do that? Are you giving them the connection? We had in our community, when we had the encampments open, room in our shelter. People wouldn't go to the shelter. They're in the encampments. For different reasons, but some of them because of the community they found in that encampment. And make sure in the programs that we're creating, we're sustaining that same part of community. And also there's a ton of research around kind of opioids, like or even drugs, and how that drug really ignites the same parts of the brain as love and connection. And that has to be part of a program. So make sure we're hitting that. And very important, we end the camps. Again, we have to be indoor orientated and end that as a living option. So quickly, our 12 deliverables here. One, Built for Zero method. You can see this online. Community Solutions is the agency, had a lot of great success around the country. We looked at Rockford, Illinois. This involves three things. Do you have a by name list so you know everybody in your community that is homeless and unsheltered? You know their needs. You can use it to prioritize and coordinate to get people care. That you have a regular group of agencies that can help that at the table, that you do effective case conferencing, and they really through how you can do that. So very important that we bring that to our community. Wanted to do that by April 1st. Dynamic data platform, the data. You got to make sure what's working and what's not. Coordination mechanisms so agencies can be at the table and coordinate better. Capacity, increase the specialized housing units, where we had, again, programs that will pay rent, but not renters that will take it. We've got three strategies around that. One is called either city or agency held leases, where either the city will be or an agency will be a leaseholder from a landlord that you set up, that we're going to have a 3-year contract. Landlord will collect rent every month. We guarantee the apartment in the same place in 3 years as they found it. And then during that time, the city or agency can become the subleaser. So barriers like not having a rental history, criminal background, can be more flexible how those are used. Agency purchase property, we have some of this going on in a program that we already have, where an agency will purchase the property and the agency will own the property. So can lease on much more generous terms than if we needed to new development. So city or agency leases, agency purchase, and new development are three strategies that we're working around that. Now we need to close the gap on case management. So here we created a specialized unit within the behavioral health section of human services. Because we found that folks that could benefit from behavioral health and some of the programs weren't connected. Within our comprehensive community support program provides a range of services. So those that are eligible for that program, and there's a lot of folks that are part of the service package, can really help maintain folks in housing and provide that sort of flexible support. So
Is that what Brian does?
no, Brian works for the city. Right. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. Yep. And then have a way that all of these case management that exists in the department and elsewhere can work together. Caring connections included, we need more peer supports. Caring connections included, how are we going to make room and invite the faith community into this? How are we going to integrate caring connections within our housing and the camps? This is a big part. We don't anticipate in our community needing more long-term shelter space than we have. We don't want to be a community that depends just on shelter. We certainly don't want those shelters to be into our campus, right? The shelter space should be temporary, moving on to another solution. But as we move this through the system to make sure everybody can be offered a place to go and we can end outdoor living, we will need increased shelter space, and we'll stand up a surge shelter that will be in place for a fixed amount of time while we work through this transition. And then we need to do a coordinated campaign. That is partnering for every person that is currently living outdoors, saying, now we have options. You can't stay here anymore, but you've got options. We'll know those folks because of the by name list. We'll know where they can go, maybe straight to housing, maybe to the surge shelter. But we'll do that campaign. And then we can restore those norms and enforce those community standards on outdoor living, outdoor behavior. Just know that Built for Zero is a big one, because that's where you learn your population, the needs. That's where you build capacity for the rest of the system. So you can read more about this. I'm going to try to go fast. I know time is short. But know that backbone support, the county is providing that system manager, Jim's position. Also utilizing our ITs, all of that. I will say our work groups were facilitated by UW Extension, so we leveraged the system to do that. Housing. There were key investments the county made in housing because of the opportunity of ARPA dollars. County could have just pulled levy or other sources potentially to do that, but saw an opportunity with ARPA dollars. We've got a program for families that are those agency purchased properties. That was a $3 million investment. We're creating within what was a nursing home, 10 beds for what will be the individuals with the most challenging mental health issues that can go to a place with some more 24/7 support that aren't going to do real well in churches for children. Have that and our Family Keys program. And just a lot of services that already exist, frankly. Some of these did, but this is what the county has really skin in the game and some new investments. The city, that is Brian's position, the services coordinator. Its infrastructure, housing projects that the city is doing. They're already also leveraging their ARPA funds and contracts that they have. So there's different pieces that we have and work together and take advantage of opportunities for funding. But for this to work and this housing to come together, we will be approaching our philanthropic community. We'll need those investments. We already gauged the appetite for that. We think that will be there. Just to know the status. Oh, this is a little bit how this works. Know that Jim now coordinates the plan. There's an action team that meets weekly that has city and county staff that are part of that. We have individuals leading different deliverable work streams. It's a very large, complex project that Jim will talk about a bit. So we created the plan, launched it on January 8th, focused on building the system the year one. We have now that single information database in that binding list. We have that, so that's very good. We have different coordinated processes, like we have what Brian does. Brian facilitates community case conferencing off of that by name list and using how that list has been prioritized. Got some pilots in terms of how we can access public housing more systemically. Got that going. And also our case management behavioral health unit. We started with 3 positions, transferred in 3 more. We're adding in our budget. There's 3 new peer support specialists that are also inside that unit. So closing those gaps, got that done. Year 2, that's when we're going to end the crisis. Our goal is by the end of 2025 to have nobody on the streets in the city of La Crosse. That includes specialized housing. And just note, due to the city's investment in specialized housing and the counties, there'll be 10 apartments available in Hillview. That'll be by the end of the year. 14 apartments in the city investment. And then also the city just announced the launch of housing partnerships with Cooley Cap and Coruna that will have some 24 beds. And it's artfully using ARPA dollars that will be tied to this plan. And going into those houses will be strategic and it'll be based on the list. And it'll be based on what's the best to get folks directly off the street or from a shelter to free up shelter space for folks on the street. And then we'll have a specialized housing plan. Can't wait to see it on our website in a couple months on how we're going to get the rest of the way there. Put up our surge shelter by the end of the year. And then we'll do some prevention strengthening and then finish the work. Leave it there. Turn over to Jim.
Yeah, a few things. So Jason's kind of giving you a sense of a lot of different organizations and a lot of moving parts and connectivity. So when it comes to project management, I think from my experience, there's sort of a stance and an art. And the science side or process side is really like linkage between these tasks. And I think as you get further in, you sort of see how one activity affects the other. If one activity gets delayed, it affects things. So, you know, that linkage makes sense. And then your stakeholders certainly want to know your deliverables. We talk about these deliverables, like what are the tasks to break down to get there. I think the art for project management is figuring out at what level to track. You want to track to the hour, to the day. I mean, for most of this project, I kind of track in 1 week chunks of activities or stuff there. But that's what we really try to do to look at. And one of the things you know about this is the world never stands still, especially for a 5-year program in terms of doing this. So it's kind of a dynamic setup of understanding how one actions affect another in terms of doing that. What I found is we have a tremendous skilled number of people inside the county and city, but also our nonprofit organizations that help people, but not as much looking at the system and the data side, which is kind of really where I come in terms of that. And so we're kind of in phase 2, I'll say, on data. This is a little bit of our initial phase, and Brian from the city runs weekly case conferencing, where we look at this by name list and getting that all together. And this is an early version of what we had of how many people are experiencing homelessness and just communicating that transparently to the community in terms of different activities. How many are unsheltered? How many are in shelters? How many don't we know where they are in terms of that? And then where do they last have housing? And then how are we tracking on getting people's housing? And so we gather this information about that. And just a couple takeaways, at least for our system right now. Right now, it's primarily 87% are single adults. When families come in, we treat that differently in terms of things, but we sort of can know and understand, because that ties into services and housing as well. One of the things we have is we have a population that's been homeless for quite a long time. Our average days of homelessness is over 500 days. What we have is quite a few at this point, with 77% needed intensive or moderate case management. So one of the things we have to do is, as a community, decide what does that mean. Intensive case management, really requires daily interaction of someone to be successful. Maybe because of substance use, maybe because of mental health. We have some category of that's 24/7. It's more like nursing home that really just needs physical bodily care and other activities. The moderate, might be several times per week. The light may be once a month. So we're trying to understand this. We're already seeing movements in this data, which is why it's important to start to track that. The other thing we look at, we say 1/3 have a disability. Let me be clear, that's an undercount. 1/3 have a physical disability that's identified or a medically diagnosed mental health disability. So that's something we will learn over time as we get to know people. But again, think about success in housing and wraparound supports. Knowing this about your population before you build housing or set up programs is really key, as well as how we align dozens and dozens of nonprofits that are serving subsegments of this, whether it's domestic violence or substance use or families, trying to get the most out of all of that. What I want to show you is kind of where our system, last part, not a surprise here, 1% of the population that we have here can afford market rate rent. So 99% need some sort of subsidy. I will say this subsidy is not like forever necessarily. Some of them need a chance to kind of get back, build some savings, do some things. So some of this, there's a role for bridge housing and roles there. And hopefully as people are being housed and cared for and supported, that at least a reasonable percent will elevate their ability to pay rent. And that's part of the sustainability of this plan, is really trying to lift people up to be able to be self-sufficient. What we've done this for long enough now that we're able to start doing some trending of information. This is available on our website. We actually updated our December numbers this morning. I know you can't read that, but the first one's sort of tracking our total homeless population and our unsheltered population of activities of this. We have a one that we specifically track on veterans. We're actually seeing a disturbing trend, but it is what it is. We will be transparent. Our veteran count, we don't know fully why, whether it's people coming into the system new, whether they're just being identified now or just asking for help now. That's something we'll look at. That's important because veterans have a different set of services that can support, and we have different agencies that can really provide actually quite a bit of support. We have to identify it. We're tracking average days of homelessness as we go into there. And then you'll see a little bit, weekly we look at how many people we've placed. So in 2024, our number was 86. 86 people we placed from homelessness into housing. But our total count sort of grew during that time too. So it's also part of looking at these numbers and being honest about what they are. And then start looking for the trends. What we did see is our average days of homelessness was decreasing. And what we saw is our level of support for those people, how many needed 24/7 intensive, improved. So that's something we're going to continue to track about that, because part of this whole philosophy, as people spend less time homelessness, their climb out is easier, whether it's mental health or substance use. So what it means right now is we've got this big population that's been homeless for a long time to deal with. That comes into the temp surge shelter and activities there and how we support them, because you need an exit plan for that too, in terms of doing that. But the goal of functional zero is getting it so each case, which can be really hard to place right now, someone who's been homeless for 500 days and doesn't have an ID and doesn't have a rental history, as we get that number better and better, it will help. And our commitment to the community and our stakeholders is to share the numbers. And we as a team, each month as we have numbers, we learn new things we want to ask and new things we want to look at to see effectiveness of what's going on. The data is really dynamic, it's interesting. It's set up in a way that the data is flowing through, where we can look at the data and be transparent with it. And some months I publish the numbers and it's discouraging. But that's our reality in terms of doing that. But we're learning some things. We're learning those we prioritize in our case conferencing are getting housing faster. That's an important message to everybody in terms of motivating those at the front lines as well as our stakeholders in our community in terms of doing this. And then just constantly learning related to that. Really excited about the added resources the county's putting into that in alignment there. I think Brian's got our system working well on these weekly case conferencing activities. So I'll just say as you start, my experience has been, it can take a while to see progress of the hard work on there. But our commitment is to show the numbers, and if we find it's not working, we have honest conversations related to that. And really, I think,
Well, that was it. And the last page is linked to our page and website. I do want to, Brian has been along this journey from the beginning, and again, is key to setting up the case conferencing. Any reflections or thoughts, Brian, you wanted to share?
Yeah, I think just generally overall, the data is really important for us because that's what we're using to drive decision making. So we're really working on being as objective as possible. None of us are married to any one solution working, and so we really let the data drive all that decision making, where now this pathways to housing list is what we call it. It really gives us that objective information about not only how many housing solutions do we need in our community, but what types, so then we can make recommendations or help drive funding to get more of those housing types. So I think that's just something from the very beginning of the planning process all the way to right now and beyond is really just using the data to drive all of our decisions. And sometimes that includes making difficult decisions like programs that have been around in our community. If they aren't working, we can't be afraid or we can't hesitate to move to something that is going to work for us and for our needs. So I think that's just the only thing that I wanted to add was using that information. We really know more than ever before about not only who's experiencing homelessness in our community, but what's it going to take to get them to stop experiencing homelessness and then stay in housing moving forward.
Yeah, answer that.
Well, thank you. Excellent presentation. I know that the task force probably has some questions. So I'd like to open it up to the task force for questions.
I don't have a, first of all, it's not a particular question, but it's something I'm sensing about your program. It feels very humane to me. And it seems like you're truly trying to get to know the people and their needs and satisfy those, realizing that that's the only way it can be successful. And I know you encourage participation from the homeless in the process, and I just want to commend you because it does feel like a very humane process. And I was listening to some online reports from the press and heard that you have a park called Hookah Park, is that correct?
Yeah, Huska Park,
Huska?
and that, yes, so that was the sanctioned encampment that existed back in that time period that since been shut down.
And do you still have people in that park, or have they all been moved to housing, or?
Yeah, good question, not in that location. So there's still people, plenty of people living outdoors in the city of La Crosse, and that's why it's so important for that search shelter to come there. So again, our plan is not to ban outdoor living or put the end to outdoor living until that's go, but that wasn't the city, but the city council. So the government made the decision to end outdoor camping in the city of La Crosse. But it really, there's still folks that are around. It really is responded to when it's creating a nuisance or when there's a police call. It's made it a little harder to track folks and where they're at and get services. But there are, again, you see the number of unsheltered on there. We've got 100 unsheltered they're not as concentrated in single camps.
So essentially, you realize that there's a need for them to be there, living outdoors, and they have the option of doing that as long as they're not creating a problem, or?
Yeah, currently. Yep. Well, currently, if there's not a police response in the plan, that would no longer be an option because there'd be the shelter option or a housing option.
So they have to be able to have an option before you require them to.
I would say that's under the plan, but that includes policies and everything working together. That's what the plan is.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So I think when you talked about your comprehensive 6-month plan, that was very compressed. I can imagine all went into that. That's very impressive. I'm curious how long it took partners to come together to even prepare to agree to come to that plan. So you had to get the city and county leadership to agree, right? But then other partners and that type of thing. So what was the process before that 6 months?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. It wasn't easy because there was a lot of cynicism, because there has been a lot of gathering and planning prior in the community around this, like the 2016 process. And there was a real skepticism, is anything going to come out of this? Are we being asked for one more thing coming together and we're not going to follow through on it? So, but I think we had strong enough relations with the leaders of agencies that they really trusted and gave us a go. And again, personal invites through relations, other invites to come together. But it really was a lot of that relationship building too, and a little bit of trust building that we're serious about this.
And do something different. That was the
Yes.
point, right? Can I ask one more? So I'm curious about your prioritization and how you come about that, because obviously people, like you said, who've been unhoused for a long time, it's going to be more challenging versus somebody who's newly. And so how do you do that?
Yeah, and I'll ask Brian to comment as well on that because he runs that process on there. So it's really in case conferencing a collective decision with those that are supporting case conferencing if there's a target population. So initially it was talking, one of the things we looked at is easy to house because our systems are not mature yet. Can we get some of this group quickly housed to keep them out of a cycle of that? Honestly, we struggle with our list of how many were easy to house. Became very few of them were actually easy to house. For briefly, we looked at those 65 and older, knowing they were qualified for getting into other healthcare programs or other types of things there. Brian, do you want to comment on the prioritization?
Yeah, the first thing I would say with that is even though we call it a priority section of the list, it doesn't mean that those folks are more important than anybody else on the list. So I think that's just one thing that we're clear about is it's just our way. We have 200 plus people on our list, and we want to be able to talk about each person every single week and move them forward. So that's just our way to break up that chunk. It's really about trial and error and learning along the way. What we initially started with our priority list is not our priority list right now. We, like Jim said, we exhausted that group of folks. Then we said, all right, now what? What did we learn from that process? And one of the things we learned was we don't have enough housing opportunities in the city of La Crosse. That's one of the biggest barriers. And so I think that's kind of how it's been in our end, is that trial and error, learning as we go. But then also it's not like me saying, I don't go to the meetings and say, this is the group that we're going to prioritize. It's a group effort. So everybody who's at the table, we have a discussion and then the group decides, because then they really are the ones. I don't have a group of people, like I'm not going and working with individuals to help them find housing. Other people at those meetings are. And so it's leveraging their knowledge and their expertise and letting them help guide that process whenever possible.
I have a question about your housing. It looks like you had some treatment housing, stair step housing. You had a $3 million amount and there's some ARPA money. How long did you think that is supposed to pay? Is it for the 5 years?
Yeah, there's two investments we saw in there. One was for family housing, And, some of that only needs to be one term because it supported agencies in purchasing properties that are now purchased. And the 3 million on more of the high-end housing in 10 beds, that contributed to remodeling of the nursing home, so that is available. So that only needs a one-time investment in terms of making that and renovating it and making it available.
So who is providing the 24/7, the treatment? Is that the
Yeah.
county?
Yeah, that's not 24/7 treatment, that's 24/7 presence.
Right.
So,
Well,
so
and then who's
Yeah.
because we've looked on the city side of transitional housing.
Yeah.
They wanted 24/7 case management for that, for a very small amount of clients. And I want to know, like, how is that
Yeah.
continuing on?
Yeah, so everyone there will have a case manager either through our CCS program, our kind of stepped up CSP
Right.
program, so community support program, or and if they haven't connected to another agency, everybody will have that. And then the 24/7 presence, there'll be someone that will be a lived experience person, most likely that will be there overnights as well, so there'll be a presence there.
Is that a paid position, or is that somebody that reports back to you, or is that somebody that just gets their rent? I mean,
That will likely be someone that gets their rent and a stipend.
Okay.
And again, that will be up later in the year, so we're still kind of working out exactly how that will work.
I think for those that are like, let's say 24/7 nursing home, we'll work with NCOs in terms of getting,
into some kind of
some type
housing
of
that,
placement or housing,
right, got
because
that.
without that service support, there's no other
No,
housing
no.
option related to that.
and we have that here
Yeah.
as well. I'm just trying to think because we hear about transitional housing, that stair step
Yep.
type of thing, and that's very, very pricey. And I'm just thinking how we can sustain that type of treatment housing on an ongoing basis, because housing, we have seen failures, right? Housing first, get them in housing, but if we don't have that wraparound help, it fails. So we know that's not, the way to go either.
So what we did for part of the ARPA funding is we were looking for specialized housing, and we had 9 outside groups make proposals in terms of that. And we had a scoring criteria we looked at, which included sustainability and whether there were support services matched to the need, whether the organization had the track record and experience to do that in terms of doing that. So we intend to do more of that. And part of specialized housing is to say, hey, we need 50 beds that provide this level of care, we need 30 for this, 20 for that, and sort of open it up to see who might be there. And ones that could bring other financial resources were viewed favorably because they had experience and they were leveraging our dollars.
Right.
So that was what we've been looking at to try to start, but we have more of that to do.
Can I add one thing about the staircase? So one of the things that I think we found in our research leading up and that we do differently is we want to flip this staircase opposite. So when talking about staircase, just to level quick, is it's kind of like, all right, you're homeless, let's get you into shelter, and then let's look at transitional housing, and then let's look at permanent housing, kind of like you have to work your way up. What we found really was to flip that of, all right, you're homeless, let's do everything we can to get you into permanent housing right away, with the caveat of you need the correct level of support so you can be successful. Because it's not just about getting you into housing, but it's about maintaining housing. So that's really our goal is we want right to the top of permanent housing with the right level of support, which is something that we track in our list. So we have an assessment that we made that says what kind of level of support. So if we can't get you into permanent, then we might look at transitional. Or if we can't do that, then we might look at shelter as our last option. That's really the future that we want to get to, is we shouldn't just be sending everybody to shelter. That should be a last resort. We should be trying to get everybody into permanent housing because that's way cheaper for the community, way more successful for people who are going into those spots, but just making sure that it's permanent housing with the right level of support. That's our number one goal in our future state, is that should be the first stop that we look at for everybody. And then when that's not achievable, then you go opposite down the staircase, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Good question. This is probably a question for Brian, but maybe you can all answer, which is, I really like what I'm hearing you talk about, the value in the weekly case conferencing, and here's the list of people, and we're we're learning who they are and understanding their story, because the formula is probably different for each individual and what their needs are and what their life lived experience is. Through my lens, which is probably a 30,000 foot view lens on a lot of these issues, one of the hang-ups is that I'd be interested to know who are the partners that attend case conferencing, and do you struggle with if those partners are funded balance of state or have other issues? Because it seems to me that the fear of losing funding by using someone's name, and so like I think there's potential like HIPAA violations, so I can't be at the table and talk about a name with HIPAA, or I'm a balance of state funded partner, so I can't actively participate in certain things. So that's a lot of word salad, but if you can unpack that and just talk about what your experience is, that would be great.
How do the partners get around those rules?
That was a very succinct way. Must be an attorney.
That's 100% what I've been thinking this whole time. It's like, Brian, how do you get these people to get around their rules? I would love to put somebody at the top of the list too, but I got a grant agreement that says these people go first.
Yeah, so that's really what we spent, what I spent months doing right after we launched the plan. Literally probably took 3 or 4 months to work through all of those barriers, having conversations. So what we did, just really high view, was I met with Balance of State multiple times to work through this issue. I met with agencies to design a release of information that they could agree to have clients sign, but then that they could exchange information. And then I met with Institute for Community Alliance, who's the organization that oversees the platform Balance of State uses. So we had multiple meetings with those partners, ironing it out on all ends, and then using county attorneys, city attorneys to make sure our release of information was sufficient. So right now, the way, after working through that whole process, if you sign a release of information for coordinated entry through Balance of State, that gives us the ability to then put you right away on our list and vice versa. So we were able to work through that process to make sure that we can share information back and forth among people. So that's really kind of, we work through all of that. And I will say one of the primary guarantees that we made and that we really stick to in case conferencing is we're not there to talk about every aspect of a person's life. The information that we talk about and the information we collect is only housing related. So we may, like, there's a category on there that says, like, do you have a disability? Yes or no. But we don't say, like, are you addicted to alcohol or drugs? Are you this mental health? Like, we don't go into any of that personal information. It's really need to know for housing related information. What is it going to take to keep somebody in housing or find somebody housing and keep them in housing? So yeah, that was a long process that we had to go through to make sure that was all ironed out for all of the partners, the traditional Balance of State partners, but then we've also expanded partners. We have way more people at the table than were allowed access to that Balance of State, to coordinated entry through Balance of State. So we have, like, the library, they kind of operate as our default day center in our community. We have them at the table. We have St. Clair Health Mission, which works with high utilizers of the emergency room, which a lot of times is people experiencing homelessness. We have our hospital systems that are engaged. We have Project Proven, which is through one of our local colleges of people who are in and out of jails. We have our justice support sanction workers as part of that. So we really expanded, really anybody who touches or works with people experiencing homelessness, we were able to get them on that release of information and have them be at the table to exchange information. And that works really well, because then all of a sudden you have agencies communicating who maybe never did. And we track, who's working with somebody. And so they're able to then communicate or know who else is working with that person. But just to keep that, yeah, we worked with Balance of State, all the agencies through that process for months before we were able to launch this list.
It may be worthwhile having a follow-up meeting to go deeper, about that.
Yeah, something tells me like, yes, you found a solution, but we would be here for the next 2 days to really be able to mimic it here, right? Like,
yeah, I think the ROI isn't the real tough part. It's the coordinated entry list. So when we say we have to go off a list to house people, we gotta pick the top person. Okay, so, and we call like 20 people because we know probably the first top 10, they're never gonna get housing. Even though I signed a lease, we have so many landlords that will not, if they know the client going in there and we have to tell them, they won't let me have a lease. So how do you get around the list of people to be housed? How do you do that?
Yeah, so one of our goals is to right size our system. We recognize, and I don't know everybody's background, so I apologize if I'm going to say something about balance of state that maybe paints it in a negative light, but balance of state is great. They have a role in the system, in our community, in our opinion, and we need to be able to rally around that so their role can be right sized. So like in our community, they take people at the top of the list, but that's folks there maybe are not appropriate for that. And so part of it is figuring out what kind of housing is appropriate for those folks so we can get them to the appropriate housing. And then all of a sudden, the next 40 people on our list are getting those opportunities from coordinated entry that are appropriate for them. So we spend a lot of time doing that part of it. And really, we kind of like coordinated entry has a role, but we're trying to expand the housing opportunities that come from experiencing homelessness. So it's not just those HUD funded balance of state, coordinated entry. It's now we have all these other housing opportunities that are available to you that are more flexible funding that don't have those strings attached that we can customize and say, we know this person will do well in this opportunity. Let's match that.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, we do need to have more housing solutions here. That's one of our issues.
So I heard someone recently use the phrase, and they're a provider of shelter services, we need to do something other than warehouse people, like an emergency shelter from like what we have currently available within our community. You have more shelter options, significantly more than we do. Catholic Charities provide services in our community. It's warming center model, standard 30 beds per night. For a set period of hours. But it really falls in a category of warehousing people. And it doesn't move the needle or help accomplish, it's indoor camping for this period of time, but it's warm and it keeps them alive. And so as we look at your shelter, when you're going to ramp up shelter services in order to meet this gap, like, can you talk about what that looks like through your lens? Is that warehousing people, or is there more to it? And then who's providing those services and who's paying for that shelter?
Do you want to take the first stab?
As far as, so we're right now working with partners, and we'll have kind of an announcement later during what those are.
Well, I don't want you to ruin the fun.
But in any event, we're going to create more shelter space than we think we need, because we want to make sure it's ample, because we need that to make sure we can close down outdoor living is an option. It will be, what it won't be, we'll say, because what we learned from the past, it won't be like renting a hotel, or it won't be something where there's an individual room. That's where we kind of get into issues. Folks are going to have to be ready for that, and we draw on a different population, kind of expand the problem. Okay? So it will be a place that's pretty Spartan, frankly, that provides a cot or a bed that it's a place that has then a team of community workers around it to do everything we can to make sure that stay is short. And for the folks that don't have a place to go right away, that tend to stay in shelters longer, there will be services there to help that. And they will say too, those with the more of the severe mental health issues that may stay at a place longer, that's where like the Hillview option, there'll be those other high-end options that hopefully will bypass the shelter entirely. So it won't be a place that will draw people because we want to be someplace, but it'll be a place that'll be just out of the go, and a lot of services around that to get folks moved quickly.
We spend a lot of time and energy trying to find people, set up appointments. People don't show up for appointments. So a lot of this is quick chance to really get to know these people and service them in that location. And it's coming in as we're adding more social work and other resources into the system. The building of specialized housing is frustratingly long in terms of doing that. And that's where an agency held lease or other model may bridge things in terms of doing this. But frankly, of our list, speaking transparently, half the list, I think we have a pretty good understanding of their needs, and we have connections and interactions. And half the list we don't really know enough about. And that's part of this, not only be humane about a place to stay, as well as food, is the ability to have more efficient interaction, to learn about their needs quickly, to see who can be placed quickly, who needs specialty care, how do we get to know them better.
And my last question was, the funding source for shelter, is La Crosse County and the city of La Crosse allocating dollars of some type to pay for or subsidize the cost of the increased shelters?
I would say not for the surge shelter. We kind of chose in city and county to use the dollar for housing investment, and so the shelter costs will most likely come from that.
Okay.
It'll be because it also will be.
Foundations are individuals who are willing to assist.
Right. And it will, and it's true because it's not an ongoing need, it will be for 6 months.
The surge shelter is temporary, a year or
Right,
two.
no, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I do have a question, for a couple of, who directed or put the team together?
Both the county administrator and the mayor directly tasked.
Okay.
Really tasked Brian and I.
And how did you get the buy-in from the stakeholders?
And that was a lot of the pre-relationships that we had. And I think they saw enough publicity and momentum around this, enough to think that, yeah, there may be actually something at the other end of this.
Just the relationship side of things and getting them, okay.
Yeah, would you say, Brian, would you have anything else to add to that? He was integral.
Yeah, I would say it's also ongoing. I mean, we continue to build that. And I think one of the strong suits of how we were able to do that is from the very beginning, we've said what we are going to do when we said we were going to do it. So right away in July when we announced it, we said by December 31st, we will have a plan. We will do this. And every single step of the way, we've accomplished that. So I think has gone a long way. We're being transparent and we're also being accountable how we want to show up in this space. We want others to show up in this same space. So I would say that continues to every single time that we say we're going to do something, we follow through and it happens by the deadline that we've set. So I think that's been very powerful for our community.
Okay, another question is, so you transition somebody into shelter or housing or temporary housing, do you require them to go through the services that you provide?
And actually, it wouldn't say necessarily required.
Or if you don't require that, how do you get their buy-in to
Yeah.
go into those services?
Well, I would say two, but then we're not placing folks in places where they're not likely to be successful either. So someone that is not going to be ready for the types of support, we wouldn't place them where they would fit. And the options in the community also shrinks for those individuals. In terms of right now, if you don't want to do anything, you can continue with groups. That's not an option anymore. So options are kind of shrinking and people won't be placed where they can't be successful.
Brian, it looked like you were ready to make a comment too.
Yeah, sorry, I can't see you, Jason. So if you look to me to answer, I can't. Sometimes you go off screen, but yeah, I would say a lot of that is done through Pathways conferencing. That's a system improvement that we're trying to do. Is for a long time, we've just been so desperate that we'll grasp at any straw or any housing opportunity that's available, whether it's appropriate or not. And so that's really what we're working hard in that weekly conferencing is if our assessment tool says that you need once a week check-ins, we shouldn't spend any time looking at like a public housing for you because we know that's not fair, that we may be able to get you in there, but then you're going to be evicted and that's going to be even harder for you to sustain housing. And so a lot of that is in talking with clients. It's not always perfect, right? You don't always have the buy-in. Clients have the ability, or people who are experiencing homelessness have the ability to do whatever they want to do, right? There are consequences one way or the other. But a lot of it is just using those relationships that people have to try to talk through of like, hey, this might not be the most appropriate option for you. This is an appropriate option. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There's no 100% effectiveness, but we really try to use that conferencing to be more mindful of not just getting people in housing, but keeping folks, helping them stay successful in housing.
In by and large, their participation is voluntary in terms of these types of programs in there. So I think it's building trust and rapport in terms of doing that. I think that's part of the peer support specialist, to have another connection with lived experience to see that. We do have people that we think would benefit from a program that choose not to enroll. At this point, we have enough people in places, we're working with those we can. Over time, those questions and research around incentives to be engaged in these types of programs, we're not at that stage yet to have gone that deep. It's something we're looking at research around. It's one of the things, because I think for a landlord to say, well, I'll do it if they, guarantee to have this. Well, we have to be very clear what we can and can't do, what we will provide, and yet this person still has agency to make decisions about their own choices.
Okay. What's, if I can ask, what's your biggest struggle with the program that you put together?
You might want to ask all three of us that question.
I will say some of it is just public expectation around quick results. There's right now, well, gosh, this Pathways Home was a bust because we still have homeless people, like that. It's hard to appreciate and see the work that Brian did for 3 months to get a legal framework so we can start discussing people. Jim came on board in July. We were just getting the system set up, and we didn't want the shelter housing before we had the system around that to guarantee that could only be temporary. So you couldn't slap that up right away. People really want fast results. And that goes to folks that are in their agencies as well and say, what are you guys doing focusing on that? We just need housing. So some of the kind of meeting that sort of expectation, I think it is a challenging part.
For me, who comes from a different world in government, for most of that, it's the complexity of stakeholders. City council is looking for something, county board something else, mayor, county administrator, business people, nonprofits, community members, churches in terms of this. And I think you had said it earlier, Jason, about balanced interest and things like that, because there's no way across that spectrum to make everyone happy. So you have a fairly complex thing, and we've committed to be very transparent and public about what we do in terms of doing that. That being said, by and large, I get tremendous encouragement from the people in the system that we're doing something in terms of doing that. And I've been within 6 months, so Jason and Brian have been there from the start. But I think right now there's tremendous levels of support by quite a complex set of people to serve, besides the homeless population and the stakeholders. Brian, I'd love to hear a comment from you about what you think is the hardest.
Yeah, I would just go off of what Jason said of those expectations of people want quick results. Speaking for La Crosse, our homeless population didn't just arrive overnight. It took years to get there. Nobody was paying attention to it, but it took us years to get there. If it was easy, you all wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be here, none of this would be here. It would have been fixed. So I think that's just the biggest thing. If it was easy, none of us would be in this predicament. And so just managing those expectations of it's really complex. It's not a one size fits all solution. If you want to do it right and make sure that this is the one and only time you have to do something like this, you have to go through the process correctly. And that takes time. So that way you're not sitting in the same room, or a different group of people sitting in the same room in 1 year, 5 years, whatever, having the same exact conversation again.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
One point that I really appreciate the heavy lifting that I think you guys are doing on behalf of La Crosse, because I do work for the government, and I find the easiest way to get something done is find someone else that has done it and did the work, and then we plagiarize and steal your ideas and thoughts and try and replicate something. But in your presentation, you addressed in real briefly, you're not set up to solve homelessness in the state or homelessness in the country. You are setting yourself up to be able to address homelessness in La Crosse County. And I don't know what that means, because I know one of the struggles we have here in Wausau is we are not nearly as organized as you are with a plan. That's why we asked you to be here. But we do have significant resources, and I work for the police department, so one of the things that we see, because we're awake 24 hours a day, is squad cars and other individuals bring people to our community. And it's not out of a place of, let's try and dump them. It's out of a place of, we don't have anything to help them here, and so maybe they can be helped in Wausau. So I interpreted what you said as your resources are for your population, and I'd like to know what that means and from a policy standpoint.
Now, glad to talk a little bit about that because that gets into the community conversation, and some of that was like, gosh, this whole problem is everybody's coming here. And now we have some better data on that. We can show that 80 to 85% of individuals are really from lacrosse. But then folks get a little shade to that. No one's coming from here. Of course not. Well, there's some truth to some people are coming here. So there's a little bit of truth to both. It's not the bulk, and it's not an excuse not to do anything about it. But you can manage that and manage some of the dynamics around that. So kind of what that looks like, and we're going to have what we call a mitigation plan in place before we should put up the search shelter. That will include communication with surrounding counties. There will be some sort of eligibility regime that will be going also around the search shelter. We'll have transportation options too, if folks come to the community expecting that they'll be eligible for certain services that are to be able to do that transport. And some of that too is in the nature of the services. Because if you're concerned about other folks coming in the community, few folks come in the community now. And why is that? Well, that may be because, again, not going to broad brush across the whole population at all. With some of it, to be able to live outdoors and not be bothered and maybe engage in behaviors they don't want. So that's happening now. But we're saying if really folks want to come to lacrosse because they see that as a pathway to their personal success, people come to lacrosse for schools. They come to, that's a public service. They come to lacrosse for parks. So then there's a big employment thing around this. That would be great. But you're not going to come to lacrosse anymore to do that because that's not going to be an option. And as far as the services that are provided, if you just provide housing to anybody or just a hotel, anybody, that too may tend to draw folks. Again, this shelter eligibility regime is going to be pretty Spartan. It's going to move people around quickly. It's not a place to hang out. So we're not going to do the mistakes of the past. Will that all work? We'll see. We're going to experiment with it, but we think it's worth doing, and we can serve people that are going to get help and need it. We can keep those resources going.
So I'm assuming that, like, as I'm listening to what you're saying, like, you will enter housing, unhoused person A enters your system wherever it is appropriate for them to enter in housing. Here are the resources and the supports that are put to have them be successful. If they fail or choose not to be successful or aren't willing to participate with that program, their eligibility, like if somebody's not willing to do that, like here's a kick at that, or do they get multiple kicks at I should
talk
about cats, but sorry, Nikki. But I'm just wondering, like, what does that look like? I mean, I know full well that individuals suffering from AODA issues, you can pay a lot of money and send them to rehab. Like, the likelihood of success is low. Like, most people are going multiple times through that type of programming. So I'm just, as I think about what the future looks like here, I'm trying to wrap my head around, like, okay, the investment is made, you're housed, it's subsidized, here are the resources, here's what you need to do to be successful. And if someone chooses not to do that and says, well, no, I'm going to go live in the park instead, but lacrosse is saying, but you can't live in the park. So maybe lacrosse isn't the place for you, or you need to participate in the program.
Yeah, and without eligibility, I don't think you'd ever say you're not eligible to come into the shelter for the night, right? And that eligible. But yes, there won't be those options that they exist as they exist now. And I think, as we look around, it's an important piece of it, because again, we don't have those resources, and otherwise you can take it, it's like taking a cup out of the ocean, float, and make sure we're able to keep the resources flowing.
Well, I think we're figuring some of that out right now.
Sure.
About what are those policies, practices, what can and can't we do, and then align with other communities and counties would be wonderful. I mean, for consistency, kind of throughout that. And I'll say we're also in a phase where right now lacrosse passed a ban on staying in parking shelters and camping out there. So there are citations being issued, and part of this incentive is some of them, as you build up this lowest citation, is if you enter the program and do this, we can have a mechanism to reduce those citations.
Sure.
Will that work for everyone? No, we're gonna work with the groups that we can work with for a period of time. I sense what you're asking is what do we do with this really difficult last group, and I think that remains to be seen. But I would like the discussion around, that question comes up all the time on any session we do about people being moved in and transported and what is our communication back and forth with each other that might be helpful.
And we're a lot better handled around it, I'll say, 'cause right now, folks
That is
scattered
true.
around and living outdoors, what's rumor, who's coming from here, we don't know. Now the place will be the search shelter, and we'll be able to get a lot better handle.
And so Wausau's similar to La Crosse in that, okay, La Crosse has the major population base, and then there's smaller communities that surround it, right? And so one of the things I like is you're talking about this issue that's like, this is a La Crosse County issue that the city of La Crosse is in, which happens to be the epicenter, right? And so do any of those smaller municipalities, are they active partners in either providing funding or providing staffing or resources of some type? And if not, is there a desire to, like in the long-term strategy, is it, this is all of our issue to address and engaging?
Yeah, and definitely in the long-term strategy, and some of that now, you don't know if those communities are incentivized as much because the problem's not on the doorstep as much. So that may shift too as camping's no longer available in the city of La Crosse. Then it may be a doorstep issue for another community that may be more incentivized to now. So we don't know. Again, we're kind of going through this. We've got a good plan for what's going to happen. We'll see how this plays out.
Thank you.
I think I'm
Yeah, I have a question. Really, I'm gonna build on one of the words Matt used, which was policy. Sorry to stand in the same. It seems like the plan in all of the work, a lot of the work is very much a staff-driven exercise, and you talked about UW extension, facilitation, CCS, a lot of acronyms, which I kind of understand from where the county staff fit in. My real question: this group was formed. This task force is a joint task force of the city of Wausau and the county, Maritime County. When or what specifically were the policy questions that you took to the policy bodies, and when? Because it has not been my experience that a plan, the great place to develop it is during an open meeting. But I do think it's very important to get that kind of policy direction from the boards, the city council and the county board, and then there are touch points, of course, to bring that back. But thinking that through, I'm wondering, how did you do that? What specifically did you bring to them? How often?
I think what it can be, if there was an impetus within policymakers or for elected officials, say, more pressure. We want our government to do something more about this. That caused the executives then to say, yeah, we're going to form a partnership and do this, and we're going to start informing the board, which they did. That some things like, yes, and we're only kind of interested maybe in something that's long-term, and we've directed staff to start looking at this. We had a strategic planning process that we went through in La Crosse County, where addressing kind of homelessness became part of the strategic plan in a broad policy category. But then that partnership and directive to staff came from the executives. The staff did the work that was presented to the policymakers that now this plan exists. This is how the city and county are working together, and we will be bringing you funding policy decisions in alignment with this plan. So that showed up like in the budget that we had that were no CCS positions. And actually that's state and federally funded, we can do that. But that is because of the plan that you saw. Or like the ARPA decisions that the city council just made. That was a recommendation that came from the Pathways Home Staffing team, and they had that information. They didn't have to approve the funding in accordance with that, but it meant a lot to those policymakers that it was aligned with the plan. So they are approving all kind of funding, or if there's a major change in policy, but otherwise it was through that strategic direction.
And did I hear you correctly that early on in this process you referenced was there a joint meeting between the, or did I hear that?
Yeah, there was a meeting in July before we did the planning process. Both the mayor and county minister are keeping the boards informed that, okay, we're exploring the territory here. We're exploring what can be done with the long-term plan. In July, Brian and I presented at the city council in the city council chambers with county board invited to talk about we're engaging in a planning process. So that was both boards were formed and aware that planning process was happening. And then we just switched venues when the plan was done to present at the county board, the city council invited with discussion afterwards, presenting the plan.
Oh, that's helpful.
One question. So you had said that if you do nothing, it's like $20 million,
Yeah.
which seems a little low. But at the end of the 5 years, once the plan's in place, no one's outside, it's working great, what's the ongoing extra added cost and to whom? How much more does it cost them than now in the city county?
Yeah, gosh, I don't know if I have those figures directly, but that would be good to.
Ballpark.
Yeah.
Lots and lots?
I would say certainly we've got to kind of mapped out, we've got a graph to show the 20 million over the same period of time can end this issue, right? And a lot of the investments will be in like purchasing properties and other things that will be one-time investments. So by and large,
case managers and people like that you have to maintain your system with.
right, and know that not all, but some of those case managers are tapping what hasn't been utilized before in terms of case managers that are available from state and federal funding sources. So there is a marginally much lesser cost to maintain what then will be in place than there would by doing nothing. There'll be some continued investment that we need because again, we can leverage rental programs that exist in public housing in a much more effective way, but we will need continued investment of flexibility around like how to fund different types of housing. But that'll be much less than if we did not.
I think one factor that, we haven't studied this number to directly answer your question, but I think one factor will be part of this functional zero. If someone comes into homelessness, they will be found quickly. They will be ideally moved to housing, worst case into shelter, and quickly moved into housing. They will be tapped into supportive programs that are funded by Medicare, Medicaid, state, balance of state, somewhere else for that level of support. But remember back to how many people that if we catch them quick, it's primarily an economic issue. They lost their job. They had a big medical bill. I'm not sure we're set up to solve that in terms of, LaCrosse City is looking at an affordable housing, and they just did a study through a third-party consultancy that said 200 houses are needed per year for 10 years, just based on affordability. So I think part of this project is also scoping where we scope. We can't address affordable housing.
Well, I understand it. I guess my maybe point is that LaCrosse is great a million times. Marathon County, a little redder.
Yeah.
So one of the first questions from a more conservative standpoint is how much is this going to cost me?
Yeah.
So those are the kind of questions that we need to have answered before people will shoot us down right away.
Yeah.
Jason, going back to your slide earlier, I think to say perhaps a different way that maybe I communicated before is where's the levy hit going to be? The levy hit, really, you're already on the LaCrosse County levy. The new part that went to the LaCrosse County tax levy is really Jim.
Yeah, that's right.
Don't tell me. Yeah, don't worry. The new levy that hit the city levy in your system was Brian, and he hit a little bit earlier than Jim did.
Yeah.
The funding that is going into the work that you had on that slide of kind of what I call indirect supports that already exist, which really is about work plan prioritization, is your time and energy. The time and energy, the county administrator, Jane's time, the county, the IT backbone support, a lot of those things, it's just really saying, hey, this is on the plate, we're taking off some other things, this is what we're working on. The other resources, federal state reimbursements, for the acronyms CCS and CSP, that again is, it's not a direct levy hit, there's probably some indirect.
It's a lot more matched up.
But, it's leveraging those other matches, but the true thing you're gonna see and feel right away is gonna be Jim and Brian's position respectively, at least in your model. Is that a fair way to
That's
say it?
accurate. It's better leveraging a lot of what exists. Again, those case manager positions, we see federal funding. Better using public housing because public housing is funded.
But you have to look at housing too. You had significant ARPA dollars buying housing. We can't leave that out.
Right, yeah,
Because that's the levy hit, right? I mean, because even if it's a one-time purchase, somebody's going to have to oversee that as well, because we're moving people in and out of what I understand. And they had numerous housing options. So is that all? I mean, that's my other question about this housing is you said this ARPA was a one-time investment to purchase it. Who runs that? I still don't understand. Is that, is that city owned then or county owned?
So I can say specific to the $1.1 million ARPA funding that went, some of that went to a nonprofit called Karuna. They will be funded basically looking at 30% of their residents' income being paid and then through Medicaid or other sources on that. So they are not asking for ongoing funding for that. Fully capped for the other 12 units would be similar in terms of doing that, expecting 30% of the renter's income to go towards housing and then look at other rental supports on that. We also had another case, it's called the Collective on 4th, where a developer had some tax-preferred housing situation where they're putting in, I think, 62 units. All but 10 are based on some level of affordability. And 13 of those units, our team is being directed to work with Lutheran Social Services in this case to provide placement and services related to that. So what we're hoping to do is to broaden that out, particularly for the less high-need housing, is to see who can work with other programs so it doesn't fall back on local government.
Right, like the affordable housing model, which usually has some local, help,
And I think the city, and Brian may know more about this, has set up sort of a revolving loan fund in terms of trying to support that, which means as they're able to, that money gets replenished in terms of that, but also knowing that affordable housing, if it's a 30-year deal, at some point, we'll retire.
We retire,
So
yeah, we've had that here.
pay attention.
Yeah. And so it's really hard because there's so much need for affordable housing,
Yes.
but it is federal, state, and local has to put into affordable housing and then find a way to keep doing that because as you said, we had other options that have retired and then those options go away again. I just wondered, I don't know if we have a lot of stakeholders with housing, but that would be something that would be a really cool thing if we could find stakeholders that would be willing to partner with us for housing because I really think that's a linchpin is housing. Just the availability of housing is it just seems like a mountain to me.
It's where our system will hit the wall.
Yeah.
Ultimately on that is folks need a good housing situation and
Okay. Well, Team Lacrosse, thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. Yeah, go ahead.
Very good.
You're willing to stick around for the rest of the meeting if you'd like, unless you have other plans. I think, I don't know, Kaylin, can you bring up the packet for today?
Brian, I think you can drop off.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I don't.
So the next thing on our agenda is balance the state migration data that I asked Dan to present and give us a little history on.
I don't know if anybody can print that.
I don't know if Kate
I
can bring it.
massaged the data so I could at least print it on a big piece of paper so I could see it.
Sure.
Because I have old eyes. So basically what this says is, this report we can't run, but the balance of state could. Okay, so we reached out. Bill reached out.
Thank you, Bill.
And got that because Sherry Wade is she's our director of the state board. So, and Bill's on my board. So really what it's showing, if you looked at this, is that 60 people came in from other coalitions. 81 of people from our coalition went out. So it's kind of a wash. There is 114, that number on the bottom, that is in this data, and those 114 people have never been in a shelter before, or at least counted anywhere. They could have been homeless somewhere, and not counted, but these 114 people checked in the shelter at least once for the first time in their life in Wisconsin. Okay, so that's what those 114 people represent. So that means, what does that mean? So I think a lot of that is people have lost their housing due to a variety of reasons, but we just came through the whole COVID thing, so I think that plays into that a little bit. And I think part of that 114 people in our coalition are some pretty big families that have resided at the Salvation Army in the last year, so they went to a family shelter for they have 3 family rooms. And some of those, I know several of the families were between 9 and 12 in a family. So that's a lot of people. And some of those numbers are probably in this 114.
And when you talk about the coalition, you talk about the 3 counties, but Marathon County being the majority.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, because, yeah. Because we have a
And
shelter.
those are just FMS numbers too. So
That's correct.
if someone's not been to a shelter, they're not.
Right,
So
that's
those are
114.
probably people that, like Matt's office was dealing with.
Yep, living on the street and want to
They
live on the
just come
street.
through and like they've never been anywhere.
So, and there are those people, and I'm not sure that we'll ever be able to make those people want to be in housing, you know what I mean? Because there is free will, I said that before. Doesn't mean you can't manage it, but there is that. So, that was just real brief, I don't know if anybody has any
No, I
questions
think
about
I just wanted to get that data out there so everybody's aware and have you explain it.
And kind of like the gentleman said too, people are gonna move in, they're gonna migrate back out, I mean, some people come here because
Maybe down.
they have family, but the family doesn't support them. So, we like our people to be near their family members if the family members are supportive. If not, sometimes it's better if they can go to where their friends are, because maybe their friends are more of a support system. I don't know.
But I think what part of it shows is that we need better data on the migration people that aren't getting shelters. Because if we want to try to send other municipalities a bill for services, or however we want to work that, we have to back it up.
I don't know that we'll ever go down that road.
I don't know that.
I don't.
I don't know how that would work. I mean, I can tell you, I've been frustrated on unrelated issues that I've sent other government entities bills. That was more to make me feel better than any expectation that the bill was actually going to be paid. Where I think we accomplish what you're talking about has to be through partnership and collaboration. And I really don't want to metaphorically hold a gun to the head of another community and say, you have to pay us. What I want is another community to recognize the value in paying on the front end and being part of a solution, which is, I think, where we're moving to in the agenda. I'll shut up until we get to that point.
It's all good. Anything else?
No. What I have to say is just about the people that don't want to partake of services in case management. Tracy, you're aware of that. I mean, there's a lot of people that need case management and navigating. I mean, I helped 3 people this week navigate housing choices of theirs, but they wanted the help. We also have a lot of people who don't want the help. You're familiar with this group of people. That is the most frustrating group of people that we deal with, and we're at a loss as to what to do with those people.
And the cross people didn't have an answer either.
No, they don't.
No.
They don't. And you can't.
Yeah. Hopefully you can't make.
You can't make them right. I mean, like in our PSH program, we can't make them take services. Chandra goes on some people's doorstep every single day. And she doesn't take the same time. She goes at different times to, surprise them or get them in a better moment. And it's sometimes very few. And that's a tough thing. I mean, luckily we have some successes. Otherwise, she probably wouldn't be working for me anymore. Because it's tough and you see it.
But anecdotally, that I absolutely don't want to improve my place in life, leave me alone, I want to live on the street, there's all these different levels of that. Like, to
Yes.
me, that represents either single digit or no more than 10% of the population that my staff are out dealing with, or Tracy's dealing with. Now, there might be another 20%, but it depends on the day, right? And then
Yes.
there's a percentage above that that are like, oh, I think I'm ready. But there's also a giant chunk of people, which we refer as like the low-hanging fruit. Like, that's who, they have an income, they have a desire to be housed and improved,
Yes.
and they're willing to work toward that. Like, that's a big number of people. And so when we look at the consequences to our community, if we can take that big number of people, get them into programming that's successful to get them out, like, all of a sudden, this isn't the emergency that maybe we feel right now, or that number, that other percentage that are less likely to succeed, like, that allows us to apply more effort and resources to it.
Well, I think there's a lot of people who kind of fall through the cracks, who are cognitively not all there. Those are the people that, I mean, there's a lot of those people. They make poor decisions because they don't know any better. And they likely have an income, and those are targets for
Great upon.
Yes, they're preyed upon terribly. And, you know, there's a lot of those people. You don't realize how many people there are. And they're young to old. And if I could do anything, the first thing I would do is do a group home, you know, have it staffed appropriately and
But we heard that, right? Like,
yes.
here's all these different,
Right.
there's a menu of housing options
Yes.
depending on what the needs of the
Yes.
individual are, right?
Yeah,
And
we
he
have
was
to have
like,
that.
some of them, I think that's, maybe he said group home, he was like, yeah, it's staffed 24 hours a day.
Nursing
Yeah,
home
but
level of
and
care.
the way he said it is absolutely true. They might not need a high level of care, they just need someone there. You know, and that obviously is much cheaper than having a high level of care.
Yep.
So, yeah, housing options are what we need.
So I know this is a little bit long meeting, but I really appreciate the folks from La Crosse coming in. And then we've got, if we go down to 4, we've got some things that we need to take care of. But going to the regional housing study from the North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning in 2022. I don't know if Caitlin can bring that up, or if Lance, if you have any
I would,
comments on that.
to move it along quickly, just like what La Crosse said, we have the same issue regionally, and that study is being freshened up by North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning. Over the next several months, they're gonna kind of try to freshen up some of the numbers. It's not gonna be as detailed, but yeah, succinctly put, we have a lack of housing at all levels. It's not just that workforce or affordable housing, it's lack of housing at all levels, which then creates pressure primarily.
So that's high level, right? Which, you know, if you need any more details, we can look at the study. Any questions on that? So moving down to the Marathon County Substance Use Disorder Gap Analysis, that was a really good analysis that was done. Lance, you want to do a high level on that as well, maybe?
Well, same thing as what La Crosse said. It's the fact that we are very fortunate, comparatively speaking, to other communities relative to mental health and AODA treatment. That said, it's never enough. I mean, no community has enough. The writer shortages are just a true thing. That said, I think, just to piggyback off what La Crosse said, I think the opportunity lies in how do you make sure that the services you do have are actually meaningfully accessible to the people that, for the purposes of this discussion, that you're really trying to link them to. But it does lay out some gaps. Housing is a big one. Sober housing they talk about is one of those areas. But from a substance abuse and mental health treatment standpoint, while we have gaps, I'm always a big fan of leveraging what you do well. We have a lot of resources that linking them with this population, again, I think this presentation was very Time very well spent.
Yeah, well, I think you can see the similarities in the analysis that we got and what they're talking about. Any questions on that? So the next item on the agenda is overview of city and county government programs and services that interface with the unhoused population from the July 15th city council meeting. Somebody from the city council would like to talk a little bit about that? Or familiar with it? I don't know if Caitlin can bring it up or not.
I want to say that meeting was a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Usually those cows go for hours and hours and hours, so it wasn't a snappy little overview, but we have, I know there was a question previously of, why we have most of our services concentrated with the police. We don't have a social service department in the city, as I said last time, and so what we do is we have the police kind of they're the ones who interface the most on the street. We have Tracy, who is community outreach, who does that type of work, again, street level. I think it's just a microcosm of what they do in intake. She understands who she meets, what's your story. And then she tries to plug them into the community resources that are available, be it a nonprofit or county, whatever. We have put a ton of money in affordable housing. We have really tried to focus our money on that. We put a lot of ARPA money into that. And it still will never be enough. It takes, when we start a project of an affordable housing project, it takes years to even start because the developer has to get LIHTC credits through the federal and state, and then we add in, and there's always pitfalls and issues, and so people wonder why we're not just, flying housing up. It is a process. You're dealing with government processes, and it takes a long time, and there'll never be enough. There isn't enough even land to put up all these type of housing. I don't know, what else do we do, Matt?
Well, this wouldn't necessarily be relevant to that meeting. I think there was well-intended suggestions that had to do with tiny homes and well, here's the solution. Like if we do tiny homes and I think we're all guilty of seeing something and it's like, maybe that's the easy solution to this.
Because we care.
But if I go back to December 26th of this year, we had a special council meeting, and since we're talking about city county government populations, so we had all of our governments had until December 31st to allocate or encumber funds, ARPA funds, and that decision had to be made by December 31st, or in 2025 and 2026, it's not on the menu to be able to spend those dollars on it. And since there's not a plan in place to say, or a partner to fund to provide shelter services or transportation services or case management services, or whatever the need is for the unhoused population, I requested that the city allocate the remaining dollars that were unspent over the ARPA period of time, which is estimated to be somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000. So the way the resolution, which ultimately got voted unanimously by our council, is to allocate, I'll screw this up, intergovernmental department, whatever, allocation, interagency agreement, thank you, to the police department to be able to spend up to $400,000 in 2025 and 2026 to be able to address needs within the homeless or unhoused community. Like the conversations we were having about that really revolved around, although there's a lot of food for thought that I need to digest from La Crosse today. We do not have day shelter today. That's over with. Outside of, we don't have city funded day shelter. Bridge Street Mission still provides day shelter every day as they were before. But come April 30th, we're not going to have any shelter services here because they have Salvation Army with 60 some beds, plus they have Catholic Charities for 6 months out of the year providing warming center. We will have nothing here in this community. And so that terrifies me into what does the future look like. And so my commitment to the council was to put a team together to identify what do we want shelter services to look like, what are the measurables for that, engage the community. I promised Alder Killian that I would talk to people that have lived experience in homelessness, as well as the other providers to the homeless community as we identify what that looks like. I would also say, as we get to, discussion of possible action item, the city's interest in funding this, like they understand that they have a role to play. Their interest is to have other partners in the funding of it and not stand alone. And I think that's appropriate. So I'm going to encourage people to think along that lens when we get to item number 4. But there are some dollars in place. It is not enough money to accomplish the list of things that exist there. And my interest in spending that money only exists if there is a RFP that's put together that has measurables, that does something other than just warehouse people. And so there's some exigency to that, meaning April 31st might be several months away, but we're the government, we're here to help, and we're not very fast. So in order to spin some of these things up and determine how this money is going to be spent, some decisions need to be made rather rapidly, and I think this group has the ability to influence the two bodies that are going to make decisions, right? The city council is going to make decisions, and the county board is going to make decisions. And what we recommend based on sitting through these presentations is going to be really important. So I'm going to shut up and just say that the city council and I expect other government entities, the county and other municipalities, to be partners, but that's me and the council. That's not necessarily what this group thinks, which moves to the next item.
Monday, right after the news story that $400,000 was good to be looking for homelessness, I had 10 homeless guys in my office asking where they can pick up a check.
Oh, I had phone calls to me saying, will you pay my rent?
But probably that's not how it works.
Right.
I was just gonna say, based on what Chief Barnes said, the city wants the county to be a good partner. I would like to say the city expects the county to be a good partner, but I think the crux of that is wanting to help the people. It's not, I'm mandated to do this or I'm mandated to do that. Just like Tracy is working with the police department and social services because there was a need. I feel like that partnership has to be based on, I as the county want to help these people and I'm going to do what I can do. So, I think what I was impressed with initially with the presentation from La Crosse was the fact that they said, we know the people, we are interacting with the people, and we're getting to know them as individuals and human beings, and that's what's going to determine their success. And I think that's what has to come from this task force. We have to find a way to really know who our homeless population is. We have to get to know them. And I look at case management and the struggles they have. I mean, do they have enough help? And no, everybody's not gonna want to do this, but getting to know those people is what's going to provide us the ability to be successful with them. So that's just something that I think is a critical issue.
Sure, thank you. Any more discussion on that point?
If I can add just to that number, if you do watch the meeting, I know Chair McElhaney referenced this there. Certainly Tracy was a big part of the presentation, but the city did lay out very nicely. They had the fire time deputy chief. I can't remember who printed it, but certainly the fire department is engaging with the unhoused population a fair amount. As Chair McElhaney referenced, they had the housing at the time. Randy Pfeiffer was the, I don't know if he was interim at that point, but it's a really nice overview. It is a long meeting, but the city went through all of the different departments that interact with the unhoused population that are nonprofits, and then from the county side, I tried to give a quick update, whether it's the Parks Department on the city side, Public Works also was referenced, but county with our Family Keys program, same, we're partners with La Crosse, and that went through all of those various departments that do deliver services, as Jason said, to a population that oftentimes is unhoused, but as Jason alluded to, we don't have neither does the city, right, a dedicated department that deals with the unhoused. So that item on there is just really to give you all those various places that interface. As it relates to the report. Happy to answer any questions you had, but I did think the city did a very nice job of laying out and structuring that meeting as to who all interfaces with that population.
If I'll add to Craig Vincent was one of them
Yeah.
who spoke, and Lance, and I'm pretty sure that's where this group was formed, because I think Lance mentioned it, or somebody on city council asked the question, and there was a little back and forth. Yeah, that looks like something we could do. So this task force, I think, sprang out of that July 15th meeting.
All right, thank you, Mayor. There's no more discussion on 3B4. We can move on to agenda item number 4, discussion and possible action. So task force will review the recommendations it is required to make that are set forth in the task force charter, and it may take action relative to any of the recommendations provided, including but not limited to the following. And this was next on our list of things to do. Does the task force believe that the demographic data review warrants recommending that the city and county develop a formal mechanism to engage surrounding municipalities relative to resource sharing?
Yes.
Any discussion?
It is a simple
Wait,
question.
let's make it simple.
I'm going to interpret that as a motion by Alder McElhaney, and I will second that motion that the answer is yes. I'm trying to play like I'm an elected official now.
Yeah.
With
So
an
you're gonna call the question?
with an amendment, and the amendment is that what we would vote on here is to give direction to, the county administrator and city staff to have prepared for us at our next meeting, which it appears is January 22nd, a recommendation to both the city and the county on a pathway to share financially in the burden and to provide resources, and a formula or a path to engage how we go about engaging with these other municipalities. And so it's not just us saying, yes, we should do that there's actually something. And the reason I think that's important is because for what I'm tasked with doing for the city, I need to know, is the county on board, and they're on board in what capacity financially? And so there has to be a mechanism to get in front of our elected officials to say, are you in? And here's what that looks like. And I don't think we're going to wordsmith what that looks like tonight. And I think that, Lance is in a good position to figure out how to go about that with the county. Is that fair?
Lance is in Mexico.
Legitimately,
I'm actually going on.
I didn't say you had to be here.
Yeah.
You email it to the chairs.
Can I add something also, because I think, looking back at what La Crosse talked about, I think that we will be in the same boat that they were when they started talking about this. That we'll have some other municipalities who will say, we don't want to invest more money or any money into something that's going to be, like the term they use, a doom cycle, right? So I think when you think about this, whatever you're going to write up is, a short term, whether it's like immediate, like you're talking about, we won't have shelters starting in May, so an ask for that, but then also that bigger ask for more of a long-term sustainable option, like both, so that they understand we're not just going to try to do the feel-good thing and be done again.
I mean, and then I truly will shut up. What I think we need is we need shelter after April 30th. The initial RFP that I'm tasked with putting together is a stopgap measure while a significant strategic plan is put in place so that we don't enter this doomsday cycle to the degree that they did, because we're nowhere in the ballpark of the doom that they faced and the issues that they were dealing with. But I see us fast tracking toward that doomsday scenario if we just go like, no more 365 shelter.
Okay, so did you, I kind of caught their strategy when it came to other municipalities, that they did not have them on board, but their strategy was simply to get to the place where living outside wasn't an option because they had adequate space in their own community. And then it almost sounded, maybe someone correct me if I'm wrong, their strategy would be then, if that was the case and they enforced their no sleeping in our community, that the other communities might now be incentivized, I think they use the words incentivized, to actually get involved, because now it wasn't a Wausau problem, it was a Schofield problem. That seemed to be their strategy. I don't know if anybody else
I picked
caught
up
that
on
or
that.
not.
I don't think that's necessarily a quick or necessarily
Right.
effective strategy for us right now when nobody's asked.
Right, yes. So that was maybe my next question was, have we had conversations at this point? No, so, okay. And then I wanted to clarify, especially because this is a public meeting, you said a couple times after April 30th, there's no 31 days in it. It's April 30th.
I was gonna call them out. But
That's right. But anyway, so, but the point I'm sorry, Matt.
That's fair.
We used to get along anyway. But anyway, so I just want to clarify that. Does that mean there's no city-funded shelter, or has Catholic Charities indicated to someone that they're not going to be
I have
providing
asked
shelter after?
Catholic Charities leadership this question. If the city or another entity does not fund the warming center, what happens when your commitment to the cold months ends? And we'll revert back to what we've always done, which is, so there will be the following 6 months, there will be no shelter services in Wausau. I shouldn't say no shelter services. What's that?
Keep it open? They had ARPA funding, and that's why they kept it open the last year?
They moved to 365 shelter because the city paid
Paid for it.
100% of the cost.
Oh.
Well, I shouldn't say 100%. The city pays monthly to Catholic Charities to provide that service. That's a fair way to say it.
Yeah.
And so without that funding, that's not a service that they're going to continue to provide. And Matt's opinion is that's a very valuable service in this community. Whether it be Catholic Charities or someone else, that's where the RFP process would come in. And there's a lot of discussion and staff time that's going to be spent saying, what does success look like with that? But is that the city of Wausau does it because we're the ones funding it? Is it the county has staff on board with that because they're partners in funding some of these resources? And that's my interpretation of what we're being asked to make in the form of recommendations.
I just want to make sure that was clear.
Yeah.
So they were counting on that funding, and what they've communicated is that without that funding, they would go back to their old model.
Correct.
Okay. So we have a motion on the table, we have a second. And yes, we want to develop a formal mechanism to engage strong municipalities. With an amendment on the table, I'm not sure how it's going to be wordsmithed.
It'll be short.
So what's the path forward, I guess?
So what
Do we just?
is it fair to say that yes, and with a recommendation that the city and county administrator and city staff work to put together a recommendation that has a short-term recommendation relative to in the short term filling the gap relative, anticipated gap relative to shelter services, and a long-term strategic plan to address homelessness.
You better start typing.
August 22nd.
Chief Barnes, are you good with that?
Yeah, I am. I think that's worded well. I mean, it's gonna answer the questions that we need to answer.
All right, any discussion on the amendment?
I'm curious.
Sure. So,
Again.
while he's typing that up, so the process would be that we vote on the amendment first, and then once the amendment passes, then we go to the original. So, with the amendment. If I'm correct, Chair Gibbs. I heard you do it several times.
The motion is to answer the direct question as yes, and further direct county administration and city staff to work to develop a short-term recommendation relative to addressing the anticipated gap in shelter services and a long-term recommendation relative to developing a strategic plan to address homelessness. Worded.
Administrator and city staff to work together to create.
Team makes the dream work.
There you
I guess I'm struggling, how does that connect with engaging of surrounding?
Yeah.
go. That's the answer is yeah. The first, I mean, you're technically under, if you look at your charter, the first thing you have to do on the you were tasked with was to determine whether or not you wanted to put an offer in on the Annabelle Apartments. That's gone. So that one's gone. The next one was how do you answer the question of whether or not the demographic data of our homeless population warrants the development of a framework for engaging surrounding municipalities.
So,
You're answering that question
with a yes.
as Chair McElhaney very succinctly put, yes.
Yes.
With a further recommendation from this group to county administration and city staff to work collaboratively to develop a short-term recommendation relative to addressing the anticipated gap in shelter services, a long-term recommendation relative to developing a strategic plan to address homelessness.
So should we be saying, though, that that plan is how to engage
That will be part of the plan.
the other communities?
Staff are gonna bring back stuff like us.
That is good.
Yes.
I think inherent in your first answer is the plan has to happen.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote on the amendment. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The amendment passes. Now we'll go back to the original with the amended motion. Any discussion, any further discussion on the original with the amendment? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, amendment passes with, the motion passes with an amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the next meeting date and time, Wednesday, January 22nd, 3 p.m. at Marathon County Courthouse. So we go back to the courthouse and then we'll come back here following meeting. So next on the agenda is we have a motion to adjourn. Motion by Vicky, second by Bill. Any discussion? Seeing none, motion passed. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes to adjourn. Thank you.